Hi, and welcome to this video on how to organize your research for your dissertation. I'm Kristen Kinsevich, a doctoral student in the Counselor Education and Supervision program at Regent University. I just want to walk through with you the things that I've done that I found helpful in doing the research portion of my dissertation in terms of the lit review. So I'm not going to address data collection or method development at all, but I'm just going to describe how to go about gathering articles, clarifying your topic, outlining and reading and writing your articles. So I'm going to just share with you some of the tools that I used, and you'll see my screen here, so I'll kind of go through some of the different tools that I have used. So the first phase that I use in organizing kind of a lit review is the gathering phase. So during this phase, you're not reading any articles, you're just gathering information. So you start, hopefully you have some kind of broad topic, because if you don't have that, you don't really have anything to type into your search box. But for me, for my dissertation, I'm studying clergy mental health. So I'm going to go ahead and type in clergy mental health, and we will see, okay, that's going to open a new tab. Okay, I think this is still working with my video for the delay here. Here I am. Okay. So clergy mental health, I've gone ahead and typed that in. And maybe right now in the beginning, I just am like, I wonder, whether pastors or clergy members have problems with their mental health. And so I might think maybe they're depressed or anxious or stressed or things like that. So initially, I'm just typing in a nice broad search, and I'm just going to glance at titles here to see, okay, this is a program improving mental health care through clergy outreach. So that might be more about the role that clergy play in providing some mental health care. And in fact, if I just read this first couple sentences, clergy are de facto providers of mental health care. So I'm like, okay, that doesn't speak to pastors' own mental health. So I'm going to keep going. Here we go. I've got another title, clergy or mental health professionals. So here I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to have to really expand my search terms to figure out how do I find out if there's any research about pastors themselves. Here I go down and I see denominational support for clergy mental health. And these little sentences talk about to maintain the mental health of leadership in the church. So, okay, now I've found something that actually relates to what I want to know. So what I would do is I'm going to show you a kind of multiple step process for when I find an article that's relevant to me, what I'm going to do. So, but I have to kind of set up, the systems first. And so before you get any farther in your process, you'll need to kind of have these systems set up, because gradually you're going to identify other themes as you find new keywords to search. And you're going to need an organizational system set up ahead of time for that. So the first thing you want to do, I use everything in Google. So I apologize if you're a Mac user. I don't know how that integrates with Google, or maybe you can use Google too, but I do everything on a Chromebook and I use Google for everything. So the first thing that you want in your Google Drive is a folder that is just for dissertation research articles. And you'll see here in the folders that I have, some topics that I ended up with. So male help seeking, pastor demographics, pastor mental health and burnout or occupational stress, that ended up coming up, pastor's spiritual well-being, some things about help seeking and caregiver help seeking, coping. So you can see how over time during my gathering phase, I started adding more and more folders. Every time you do a search, you want to add a folder for that, unless it's still kind of all around the same. So maybe you're typing in clergy burnout and then you do a new search, clergy occupational stress. You might consider them kind of one still category, or maybe your research is taking that into two different pieces. And so you'd have one folder for clergy occupational stress and one for burnout. Either way, you want to have one kind of main folder that's dissertation research articles. And then what you want to do is set up for yourself a Google Sheets that is is complete references list. And so what you want to do here is set up some columns. First, your citation column, which should be nice and long. And then these other columns, whether or not it's a critical source, which we'll talk about in a minute, whether or not you did an abstract note, which we'll also talk about all these things in a minute, whether or not you read the article, and then whether or not you've cited it in the paper itself. So you won't need to worry about this yet. This is just kind of setting yourself up so that for every article, you've done the same system and you've kept track of it, because you will have so many sources, you won't be able to remember them all. So you really need to keep good track. Now, make sure that you freeze this top row. I think that's in view here, and freeze. You can freeze one row. And that way, as you add sources, they're going to be in all, not alphabetical order. But what you then can do is select the column and this little tiny arrow here, sort sheet A to Z. And I've already done that, so mine are in alphabetical order. That way, when you go to actually make your references list in a document, you can copy and paste this into there and it's already alphabetized for you. So that's a super handy way to just keep track of your sources as you go. Now, for every, the other thing you need to set up is if you type keep.google.com, you will go to a Google Keep. It will be connected with your Google account. And for every article, you will do the same process. And so let's go back to the article that we found over here that was relevant. Denominational support for clergy mental health, which is funny. I'm looking at this going, in real life, I have not come across this article. So I will save this one. So I'll do this process. All right. So first, what I would do is you want to copy and paste the citation into your spreadsheet. So this little quotation mark in my school's database, you click on this and you can cite the item and you can choose. For me, it's APA. And so there's my citation right there. So I'm going to copy and paste that, just close that out, into my references list, which I'm going to go all the way to the end here because you just keep tacking them on. I have a lot of sources now. Okay, so I'll just do it over here. So there I go. Now my formatting is not great, so I would want to make sure I do format, text wrapping, and wrap that text in so it's kind of not overlapping with my others. I can, if you want to change the font now, you can, or you can do that kind of all at once later. So don't worry too much about that because you can format later. But here, I don't know if it's a critical source yet or not, so I'm not going to write anything there. I'm not reading the article right now, and I certainly haven't cited it in the paper yet. So the thing that matters here is this column, abstract note. So for every single article that you think is going to be useful to you, what you want to do then, after you've pulled a citation from over here, you click on this full text online. Sorry, I keep bouncing in and out here. Okay, so you log in if that's what your school requires. Okay. Sorry, my computer is needing a lot of time to think here. All right, so here now you can go to the full text PDF. I won't do that right now because what I really want is, here they're calling it a head note. I would normally call it an abstract. It's the first paragraph, so probably if we clicked on the full text, it would be called an abstract. But basically, this is your abstract right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go into Google Keep over here, and I'm going to, I liked to write the word abstract just so that it's clear to me that this is the abstract so I don't get confused later. And then I just pop it right in there. Now, my title is going to be some keywords. So I'm going to read this abstract and just see kind of what keywords pop out at me. It seems like this is talking about the provision of services. So yeah, a range of services are now being offered to support clergy. So I'm going to say programs for clergy. And you see how I don't put spaces in here. That's because I want to be able to search it later. And if I just search for those words independently, then I might find some of the words in the abstract. I want to be able to find anything that I find on programs for clergy. I want to be able to find it later. And also, of course, what I need to do at the bottom is put in the citation, not the whole citation, just what I would write in the text. So I'm going to go back to my references here, and it looks like it's Tri-Hub et al. 2010. So I'm going to write here that, okay? And that's my Google Keep. Okay, so that is basically it. And then when I go back to my spreadsheet, I put a little X in abstract note, because now I know, okay, in Google Keep, I've saved the abstract. Okay, so the last thing that I have to do is download the article. And so that is where I'm going to go to the full text. And I'm sorry that my picture keeps popping up and down here. And I'm going to either go here to download PDF, or you can click on this button here. And so I'm going to download it, and I'm going to save it in my Google Drive. Sorry, this will kind of take a minute to get into the right spot. I've got my PhD, my dissertation, the dissertation proposal class that I'm currently taking. And then here's my dissertation research articles folder. So here I'm going to put the author's names, which was Tri-Hub et al. 2010. And then I'm going to say clergy programs overview, because they weren't describing a specific program that they've done for clergy. They were looking at kind of an overview of all of them. So that's kind of my quick, okay, this article. And then here, I will have to make a new folder. I'm kind of doing this a little bit artificially for the purpose of this video. So I'll make a new folder that says programs for clergy, that matches what I called it in the Google Keep note. So I'm going to go ahead and save the article into that folder. That way I have it and I don't have to go looking for it later. So did I hit save? Okay. All right, so the download is complete. So basically for every single article that I find, that's my process. I'm saving the citation in my Google Sheets. I'm saving the abstract in Google Keep with a little header of a keyword I want to search later. And then I'm making sure that I've saved the article and I've checked off the abstract note right there. So that's the process. So this is the gathering phase, and you're just going to keep doing this and keep doing this. And, one idea will lead to another. And you saw in my list there of all the different types of articles I have, in my dissertation articles drive here. I ended up looking at male help seeking and demographics and mental health and burnout. Occupational stress was included in there. Spiritual well-being, help seeking, pastors in coping. So all of these things, and possible screening and assessment tools. So I put my scales, and there's my programs for clergy, my new folder there. So I'm just going to basically gather and gather until I have 50 to 100 articles at least before I move into the next phase. And really, that number in some ways is artificial because it might be much higher or it could be a little bit lower depending on how much research is out there on your topic. What you really want to do is keep searching and keep following new threads until you cannot think of any more. Then meet with your advisor or dissertation chair and ask them, tell them the threads or the ideas that you've come up with and see if they have any knowledge. I had not thought of male help seeking, but my dissertation chair was like, hey, you're talking about clergy. That's a largely male population. I know there's a lot of research out there about male help seeking because ultimately the focus of my project is on pastors' attitudes towards seeking professional help for themselves. So that was a really helpful angle that I had not thought of. And when I typed in male help seeking into my library database search, man, I got so much, just like when I typed in clergy occupational stress. I got so much, as opposed to when I typed in my first term of pastor mental health or clergy mental health, it didn't really give me what I was looking for. So you got to kind of play around with key search terms until you really feel like you've exhausted the literature. And all along the way, you're doing the same process of the spreadsheet, the Google Keep note, downloading the article. So that's the gathering phase. What is critical here is that you are not reading any articles. Now, it's possible that you've come across a dissertation or another article that really sparked your whole idea in the first place. I know for me, I had come across a dissertation that I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of along the lines of something I wanted to do. So you should have read that and maybe 2 or 3 others that kind of had sparked your thinking. Hopefully you got an idea from somewhere. Other than that, you're really not reading any articles at this point. So don't leave the gathering phase until you're done with it. And as a final step, what you want to do, I forgot to mention this. Every time you make a Google Keep note, every time you save an article, you're writing in the header, like I did, programs for clergy here. You also want to pay attention to when you find a really good source. Now, this is a fine source, but I wouldn't call it a critical source because it's just slightly contributing to what I might say. But the dissertation that I had found, or an article that's like, oh, this is exactly what I'm trying to build off of. What you would want to also do in the header is write critical source. Again, no space. That way it's easy to search for that later. Then the very last step of the gathering phase, you want to search for that term in Google Keep, critical source. Now, I actually had called it something else, so I'm not sure what I had called it, but I'm going to just type in critical source. And here, see, now this is going to be everything that I've ever labeled a critical source. So that should maybe be 20 sources that are really like, these are the foundation. The other pieces fill in, but these studies are really central to my point and define my constructs. This should be like seminal works of things. Part of what I studied was role identity theory. So, there was a couple of articles that talked about pastors and role identity. That was critical. The male help seeking, for the most part, wasn't critical sources except for kind of the seminal studies that really had, the original kind of theories in it and the research. So your critical source, you should get, like I said, about 20. Now over here, I will say while I'm on this screen that this labels, initially, I tried to use that as a way of putting my sources in. So you see some of my sources there. There is a limit to the number of labels. I think it's like 50. And so it ended up not being useful. The way it's helpful is that you can just click on a label and it shows you everything from that. But because I was just writing an abstract note for each one, it didn't make any sense. So I would not recommend that. I would just, put it down. You can see it's an evolution of the ways that I documented things, but I'm telling you now kind of the way I did it well. So this is really what your note should look like. So now what you can do, if you have, 20 sources when you search for critical source, what you can do in Google Keep is actually put it in I think you have to, let me see. You have, I forget how I did this. You can, oh, I see. That's right. Okay. You select them all. So if you click on, I think it's control, let me see. I'm not clicking on this. Control A. Yeah. Control A selects all. And so that's what you need to do once you have your critical source. Like if you have 20 of these, you would control A. And then over here on your little dots, you would say copy to Google Docs. And then what you have is a Google Doc with all of the abstracts of your critical sources together. So the last part of your gathering phase is going to be to put that in a Google Doc, print it out, and start just kind of reading through the abstracts again and just highlighting some things and see if there's any other themes that emerge that you're like, oh, you know what? That was a search term that, I keep seeing this keyword come up a lot. Clergy occupational stress for me was one of those where, okay, I keep seeing this in abstracts. So I'm going to go back and search that one or something. So now you're starting to really get a sense of what's out there in the literature and kind of how your project is taking shape. And so that would move you into the next phase, which is your outlining phase. And you really only want to do this, like I said, after you've gathered as much as you think of when the well feels dry. Now, you will keep adding sources after that because you'll find other references in certain articles that you want to go and look up specifically. But in terms of just the keyword search terms, you should feel like I have exhausted everything that I can think of. I've asked a couple people and, with knowledge of the subject matter, and they can't think of anything else. So I'm good. So now what you can do then is search your Google Keep. Now you'll have all of the abstracts in Google Keep by this point. So you've got 100 abstracts in here. Well, I want to know, for me, one of them was, let me see. If I search for mental health without a space, I think that was one. Yeah. Okay. So that was one of my keywords. So, and some of them, by the way, might have more. So like this here, this article, SWB was my abbreviation for spiritual well-being, mental health, occupational stress. So those were my keywords. Those ended up being different parts of my outline, but this abstract will be kind of in all of them. So what I'm going to do is the same thing that I did for my critical source, I'm going to do for each of the kind of keywords that I had. And that should pretty much match what you called these folders. So all your articles are stored in here. And, here it's where I have pastor mental health and burnout. So anything that relates to that, those articles are all in here. So when I do this, and I have this, I click on, I do Control A again, and that should select them all. Did it? Control A. Yeah. Okay, Control A. So they're all selected, I think. Nope, they're not. Let me just see what's going wrong here. Control A. There we go. Okay, so it'll say over here in the corner if it's selected. So then I go ahead and I copy to Google Doc again. So I do that for as many of the keywords as I had. So for me, I had, the critical sources, I had role identity theory, I had mental health, spiritual well-being. So every time I'm looking, now I know I have 23 studies in this section. I'm going to put that in Google Doc and I'm going to print those out all together. So then what you have is these packets that are specific to each topic. So for me, I'll show you here. This was I didn't call it critical sources when I was doing it. I called it my selective bibliography. So these are all my critical sources. And you can see I've highlighted and made notes on things here. So this is my packet for my critical sources. I'm going to go back to this and reread it a bunch, but that helped me know that kind of the well was dry and it started to help shape the frame of my topic. So then I have my other packet here that was role identity theory. And you can see how I've marked this all up. These are just the abstracts. And then here, my clergy occupational stress and burnout. So again, I've marked this all up. This is one of the thicker ones because I found more research on that topic. So I ended up with about 8 to 10 of these packets that were, just all the abstracts that all have to do with the same thing. So now you're ready kind of for your outlining phase. And let me show you the prospectus that I use. This is just the instructions that one of my professors talked about. So we're really just talking about chapter 1 here. And we're really focusing in on this little part here, B, which is the broad themes in the literature. So this is a starting point. What I ended up doing with that was creating a bigger outline. And so I put it in as the headings, the way that APA headings work. So up here, I have chapter 1. Don't worry about an introduction yet. Start with the broad themes in the literature. And so you can see here, these were my keywords: pastor demographics, role identity, occupational stress, burnout, and mental health. Now, I did tweak and change some of these things as I, learned more later. But for now, you're just kind of saying, okay, these are my topics. And I thought about what order does it make sense to put these in? So, you usually start from broad and get narrower. And so for me, it was kind of this question of okay, who are pastors? How is that defined as a construct in the literature? And then that kind of led into naturally a discussion about their role and sense of identity, which then, I'm discussing the ambiguous roles of clergy. And so then that just naturally led into the really specific types of occupational stress that they face. And that naturally led into, okay, if they're facing this stress, then how's their mental health and what's the burnout look like? And then spiritual well-being also kind of made sense as another kind of offshoot of well-being and mental health. And then, kind of the coping aspect, how are they using religious coping or other kinds of coping? What does the literature say about how pastors cope with things? And then my dependent variable is about help seeking. So I want to know, what do we already know about help seeking patterns? And that was, again, in general population, as well as Christians, as well as men, anything about clergy, and kind of then what scales are out there that measure that. And then I did have a section here, prevention and intervention programs for clergy. So in the end, I hope that my project contributes to the development of some strategic interventions that relate, that overcome some of the help-seeking barriers that clergy might have. And so I added in a section on that. And that's what the article that I found while making this video that I'm going to go back and read is, would kind of fit in that section a little bit. It'd be a good summary of what exists out there for pastors. So that's kind of, you can see how in my outlining phase, what I've done is I've just written a sentence or two, kind of giving myself a little bit of instructions, okay, describe Protestant clergy in the United States, and in particular within the Assemblies of God. That's my population. Overview descriptive statistics on gender, ethnicity, marital status, age, average length of time in ministry. And I have a little citation here. So again, I'm using my critical sources to kind of make this, what do these kind of 20 sources say about these topics? So I'm going to just be able to write a little teeny blurb for each one. So that's in your outlining phase. It begins to take shape. And don't worry about the introduction or the problem statement yet, but you might want to start writing out some of your research questions. And you should have a little bit of a hunch at this point as to what type of statistical test would best fit your research questions. So, okay, if I want to know about pastors' help-seeking attitudes and I have all these other variables, well, I'm probably going to do a survey and I'm going to use some validated instruments that I find in the literature. And so I'm going to gear my research questions to kind of reflect the type of study I'm thinking of doing. I originally was also thinking of a pre-test, post-test kind of study. If I was going to design an intervention for pastors, that didn't end up being the direction that I went, but that would be another kind of, okay, I'm going to frame my research questions around kind of what do I think, I'm looking for, and what do I think I'll find in my hypotheses. I'm expressing that. So that's in the outlining phase. And, let me make sure. Okay, so the last step of this, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I don't forget anything. The last step is to take your packets, how many ever you have, so it should kind of, be the 8 or 10 themes that you have. And you don't need to worry about the selective bibliography or your critical sources, but for all the other kind of, religious coping, help-seeking patterns, these different packets that you have, now what you want to do is put them in order according to your prospectus, and then get your planner out. And you want to look at, if you have deadlines or whatever, how many of these do I need to write in a week until my next deadline? So if you have plenty of time, I would say write one section a week. So one packet per week. These pages are really somewhere between like 3 to 5 pages for each section. Some of them might be a little more. It depends on how many you have, but you're aiming for the broad themes in the literature. It's probably going to be about 30 pages. So it depends on your school, but in terms of the overall length and what you're looking for, because you're going to add the introduction later, you're going to add your problem statement and your purpose statement and your research questions and hypotheses later. So I'm just talking about that core, like getting your hands into the literature. That's, going to be about 30, 35 pages max. So for my school, our total is like around 90 to 100 pages for a complete dissertation. So that's where you want to just find out what your school, is aiming for. If you have to write a 200-page dissertation, then obviously this is maybe going to be a little bit broader for you. But you figure out, how many topics do I have? How long should each of those topics be? If I just do some basic dividing of, how many pages I'm going for and how many topics I have, what does that mean I have to write? And then you write in your planner which section you're writing in all the weeks. And so you just write that all out into your planner week by week. Then basically all you're doing is writing little mini papers each week. Now, there are some things you have to keep in mind as you go, and so I'll mention that in a little bit. But now keep in mind, you've done all of this without reading more than a handful of articles, maybe 2 or 3 that kind of sparked your topic. All you've done is gathered and kept the abstracts and sorted the abstracts and created your outline. So that's it. You have not done any reading yet. So now you're in a clarifying phase. And this is where you kind of take a step back to digest, sit with the outline that you've created. And I end up having to do some of these things for a grant that I was applying for. And it ended up being like the most helpful thing to clarify my project before I started writing. And so some of what I had to do, like in making this kind of detailed prospectus, that was part of it. So the outlining really helped me. But then here were some other things that I did. So in this clarifying phase, I created a working title, which really just helped me kind of coalesce around what exactly is it that I'm looking at. So it was attitudes towards seeking professional help for pastors in the Assemblies of God in the United States, or something like that. Assembly of God ministers in the United States, something like that. You can change that later. Don't get too married to it. It's just kind of like okay, if I have to summarize in one title what I'm doing, let me do that. Then you should write out your core question in like 1 to 3 sentences, framing it as a question. So what exactly is it that I'm asking? Then if you had to write a project quotation to summarize your project, what would it be? I thought that was such a great little assignment that I had to do for the grant, but it was so helpful to me. So my quote was, "When pastors need help but don't seek help, the whole church suffers." Then write a 200-word summary of your project, just like a nugget. It should kind of include all these different heading, kind of subtopics that you've created in your outline. So you're just kind of writing like a little nugget summary, almost like an abstract, but, and you might use some of it for your abstract later on, but it would really just kind of coalesce and be able to summarize your outline in a little paragraph. So 200 words was a good amount for that. And then write 1 to 2 paragraphs on how you hope your project will contribute to the literature and to society. So just kind of what do you hope this does? Now, you can borrow from this later when you go to write your purpose statement, but ultimately it's just for you to kind of really understand like what you're going for, what your project's about, why you're doing it. And so that was really helpful. And then after you do all of that, find your grandmother or somebody's grandmother and tell them about your project. And it will help you kind of practice saying it in language that anybody can understand. You can have your like 30-second version, you can have your 5-minute version, but no one wants to hear more than that. So just keep it at that. But that will really help you. And then you can also, further fill in these details in your prospectus. So you can see here in, let's say, the help seeking pattern section, how, I've cited these sources. These were all sources that I deemed critical sources. And so they gave the frame for each section. All right. So now you are at the reading and writing phase. And yes, that is one phase, not two. So this is the way that I think it is most efficient for this amount of literature, because in other times when I've written shorter projects, ultimately, maybe you can keep more in your head at once. But here, by the time I'm writing my 6th section, I don't remember what I've necessarily gotten finished for my first section. So this is where keeping a good track of your references are here in this spreadsheet. You want to, when you've deemed it a critical source, of course, you want to have marked that down. But then here you want to make sure when you cite it in the paper, you put an X in this box here. And then, and also when you've read it. Now, to be honest with you, when I was reading and writing, I sometimes had cited something in my paper before I had actually read the article. And that's because sometimes in your opening statements, you might say something like, many have examined the role of occupational stress in clergy life. And then you might have 6 sources that you're citing right there, just to kind of say, these are the ones that I'm talking about when I say many researchers. And so you're going to know that from the abstracts. If for some reason you're horribly wrong because the abstract was terrible and led you astray, you can always, delete that. But, you want to just have kind of, okay, all of these sources talked about this main thing, and then you kind of can break it down. So don't write your introduction until last. So forget about that for now. You're just focusing on the broad themes in literature, and you're following the prospectus that you made. And 1 section or maybe 2 sections a week, you're just writing these little mini papers. And so make sure you stay on track and follow, the schedule that you set for yourself. So every time now, okay, it's my week to do my clergy occupational stress section. So I've got my abstracts here. I'm going through and I'm highlighting the abstracts. And on a separate piece of paper, I'm kind of jotting down notes as I read the abstracts, and maybe even finding themes like, okay, these abstracts talked about specific scales that they developed for measuring clergy occupational stress. And these talked about specific boundary related issues. And these talked about, low pay or whatever. And so I'm writing that kind of as I'm going. And frankly, my notes end up being a total mess. I don't know. Here's a good example of what it looks like when I'm reading through the abstracts and I'm organizing. So for this was the help seeking one. And I had, male help seeking. As I'm reading the abstracts, these are all the articles that are talking about that. And then how to improve help seeking, some of these specific to clergy help seeking. There was only a few, but I put them there. Specifically help seeking in race, I put here. So now I've got my abstracts. I've got my little piece where I'm only focusing on my one packet for that week, and I'm organizing it. Then I read the articles in that order. So I say, okay, this first one on clergy help seeking was SHIP 2009. So now I'm going to read SHIP 2009. And I've got my tab open with my Google Doc. That's kind of my copy of my prospectus, but now I'm using that as my dissertation manuscript. And so now I'm in that section in the prospectus, I'm ready to write. And so as I'm reading the article, I might copy and paste quotes and make sure my citation is correct right away when I do it. Saves time from having to go back and find it later. Or maybe I'm summarizing, okay, this article, talked about this. So I might say, Smith et al. 2016 noted that this scale was appropriate to use with a clergy population or whatever. I'm writing the actual sentence rather than taking notes, because ultimately in the end, you end up with a working paragraph. You can copy and paste and edit and rearrange. And it's why I'm so glad we don't have to write on typewriters or something like that anymore, because you have the luxury of kind of saying, okay, this little mini section, even within my section here on help seeking, this is my help seeking packet. I'm just reading these 4 articles that I know all talk about clergy. And that's going to be, a couple of paragraphs. So as I'm reading those and writing about them, then I can make that information all fit in that one section. And then if I come across something later, I might pop it into that section. Along the way, what you want to have is 2 key sections. At the end of your document, you want to have, or kind of where you're going to have your problem statement, put a little header that says, call in the literature. And then every time you come across an article that basically begs for your project to be done, future research should include blah, blah, you pull a quote out of there and you stick it into that call in the literature. So when I was done, I had 10 studies that had specifically mentioned something about the way I'm doing my project and how it needed to be done. So that then it was super easy to write. If I hadn't kept up with it all along the way, I'd be like, oh man, I know there's a call in the literature for my study, but I don't remember who said that. So you want to keep that along the way. And also as you go, do pay attention to the scales that people use to measure the constructs that you're measuring, because then you can, I personally included a little blurb on the various scales kind of in each section. So, okay, what scales are used for help seeking? What scales are used to measure coping? What scales are used to measure occupational stress? And so I would give a little blurb. In my method section, which for me is chapter 2, that's going to be where I'm going to go into the stats on the specific scales that I've chosen to use. But here I'm kind of giving an overview of how research is conducted in this area. So you want to kind of keep that every time you come across a scale somebody used, pop that in there. So sometimes I was working in multiple sections because, like I said, one article might have something about clergy occupational stress and rates of depression and, spiritual well-being. And so I'm just popping in, my notes as I go, but I'm writing them as full sentences with correct citations so that I don't have to go back and redo it. I'm just shaping as I go. So that's the reading and writing phase. Once you have your broad themes in the literature, and you're reading your articles kind of in order, even sub order, then you've kind of taken all those notes in a way that makes logical sense. And then you write your problem statement, which is going to be kind of your summary of everything that you summed up, you found in the literature, and then kind of your call for your study in the literature. Then you write your purpose statement, and that is going to be, you might draw from some things you wrote in that clarifying phase, kind of why are you doing this? And then you would edit your research questions so that in the clarifying phase, you kind of wrote up some research questions. Now you've read everything and written everything. You probably have a better handle on exactly how your research questions should be worded. So you can tweak those, and then you're done with chapter 1. So, oh, no, you're not. I just remembered the last thing you have to do is go back and write your introduction, and that you'll have a lot more clarity on after you've written all of that. Now you can say, okay, how do I start really broad? And so I started off, okay, this is an important topic because mental health has been kind of in the headlines and in the research, and specifically some pastors making headlines with some suicide attempts and things like that. And, how is mental health perceived in the church? What's a pastor's role in giving care to parishioners, and how that impacts, kind of them neglecting their own well-being. And, so, okay, what do we know about that? It's just kind of gives my introduction was only 3 pages, and it just kind of gives you a way to segue into, and now here's what the literature has to say. So then you're done with chapter 1. So that's it. I hope that's been helpful, and subscribe to my channel, like this video if it was helpful to you, and I'll see you next time.